Hello readers, I am the Avid reader, and today we are reviewing 3 Miles Down, written by Harry Turtledove in 2021. So I believe this is Turtledove's most recent book, and for a Turtledove book it's quite short. A lot of his books are 500-600 pages. This one is less than 300 pages. And this is more science fiction than alternative history, although there is alternative history here. And like Turtledove's World War series, it has aliens in it, but it is still quite different. So 3 Miles Down takes place in the 1970s, between 1974 and 75, during the Watergate scandal. So this is in the middle of the Cold War, when you have Nixon and Gerald Ford and Kissinger, and Vietnam has just ended. And you follow the character of Jerry Stiglitz, who's a graduate student marine biologist at UCLA. He has a fiancée called Anne, who is soon going to marry. And I'm gonna say, this book was underwhelming. It's very short for a first contact story. You kind of have the promise of aliens in this book, and it doesn't really deliver. You get to see a lot of aliens in the World War series by Turtledove. You barely see any aliens in 3 Miles Down actually, even if it's supposedly a story of first contact. So let's get into the story. So Jerry Stiglitz is out in Los Angeles, and he gets an offer from people working for the CIA to join Project Azonian. And he's partially going to be there to provide cover for something they are exploring in the North Pacific. But the thing is, when they want him to work in the middle of nowhere, he's going to get married. So he has to put off his marriage with his fiancée, Anna, for a few months. But they offer him a lot of money for this. They offer to repay the wedding expenses, and the monetary incentive works, so he accepts. He talks with his fiancée, she says okay. And then he takes a flight to Midway, and then he takes an helicopter to the middle of the North Pacific. And they're actually quite close to Russia. The place where he's going to sleep on this ship, the roommate he has is Stephen Dole, who I believe in real life is a science fiction writer, but he also works for the RAND Corporation. And the RAND Corporation is basically an American government think tank that promotes science and technology. Stephen Dole and Jerry Stiglitz, they get along well. There's a lot of secrecy on this ship, so you can't talk about everything with everyone really. Jerry has had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and he's going to be shown a tape, but he has to sign another non-disclosure agreement, and he listens to it, and then he hears that a Russian submarine is sunk. So after he signed the non-disclosure agreement, he learns that there's a spaceship on the bottom of the ocean that sunk a Soviet nuclear submarine. And they have this claw on the Glomar Express ship called Clementine, who's going to pull up the spaceship. And Jerry, as he is a sci-fi writer, is asked to explore various scenarios. So he writes up some ideas, presents them to the boss of the ship. The boss likes them, he finds them interesting. And you have a Russian ship who passes by and starts asking questions. They are bribed away with vodka, I'm not kidding. The Americans kept a secret stash of vodka on the ship to get the Russians to back off. And after the struggle to pull up this spaceship into the moon pool, Jerry and Steve are the ones who are selected to go and try to open this ship and explore it. And they are in these kind of spacesuits, and they're not sure if they're gonna get in it. But Jerry says the word friend, and the ship opens up and they go in. So they explore a bit, they see a yellow line, and then they leave. And they discuss with the crew what has happened, and they decide to go in again. And this time they explore it more fully. They see a kind of a kitchen. They think they get into the control room, where they see 3 aliens, 2 of them in a hibernation state, 1 of them dead, and they're tall and they have beaks. And now they're considering whether we should wake them or not. And after that they exit the spaceship. But then Jerry finds out that they're trying to cut off a piece of the spaceship with a blowtorch, and he gets angry at the ship's crew for doing this, so he goes and yells at one of the bosses, and this results in him and Stephen Dole to being sent back to the mainland. So they're basically fired. They get a huge payoff to shut up about what they did. So Steve Dole returns to his job at the RAND Corporation. Jerry Stiglitz continues his work as a grad student. Jerry meets up with his fiancée Anna, and a few months later they get married. And by the way, while they were on the ship, Richard Nixon resigns. So throughout this story you have a B-plot of the Watergate scandal moving along, ending with Richard Nixon resigning and Gerald Ford becoming president. But eventually the media start getting closer and closer to this secret project. They start getting closer and closer to the truth. And this ends with Jerry reading in the newspaper that Steve was killed in a botched robbery. And of course, Jerry has alarm bells ringing him as he thinks it's the CIA, so he decides to withdraw some money and get the hell out of there. So he leaves and drives covertly all the way to Washington, D.C. And before he did that, by the way, he went to his friend Tim to collect a couple pictures he brought with him secretly from the ship, giving proof of the spaceship. And he brings these couple of pictures to the Russian embassy. He says he wants to meet the Russian ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. He meets Dobrynin, he shows the pictures to him, and this results in some phone calls between the Soviet higher-ups and the Americans. Jerry stays at the embassy for a few hours so he doesn't get killed. And finally, there's an understanding between the Americans and the Soviets, basically that, okay, if you want to avoid nuclear war, one, you're not gonna kill Jerry, and two, the United States is going to allow the Soviets to be an equal partner in this spaceship exploration. The Americans under Gerald Ford agrees. Jerry can leave the embassy. He makes a few phone calls to his family to let them know that he's coming back and that he's safe. He eats lunch with the Soviet military attaché a couple times. Just before he returns to Los Angeles, he has the CIA knocking on his door, and basically they yell at him but don't hurt him. And he returns to LA. He meets up with his wife, who's happy to see him, and then he gets a phone call from the Russian ambassador Dobrynin offering him to join the Soviet expedition on the joint American-Soviet exploration of the spaceship. And Jerry agrees to this. So he travels with the Soviet delegation back to Midway and back to the North Pacific. He returns to the ship where he worked previously. Then you have Americans and Soviets together exploring the spaceship. Eventually they get approval from the higher ups to wake the aliens that are there. But to take some security measures, one Soviet and one American brings an AR-15 when they go back into the spaceship. And you have a bunch of nukes that are pointed towards the ship and the spaceship to destroy everything if things go wrong. And Jerry, who now has worked both for the Americans and kind of the Soviets, he's the one who gets to press the button to wake the alien. He presses it and the big alien thing opens its eyes and they look into each other's eyes. And that's how the story ends. It's an open ending of what happens next, whether everything goes to hell or everything improves. And that's the story. So how would I rate 3 Miles Down by Harry Turtledove? I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. This is my second least favorite Turtledove book behind Ruled Britannia. The saving grace of this book is that you have the Turtledove humor Harry Turtledove usually has in his novels, but the plot is weak. There are a lot of interesting aspects in the story, but not that much happens in it really, and you don't really see any aliens in it at all. You get a build-up without having a nice climax. You have to wait 1/3 of the book before they even go into the spaceship, and they wake the aliens on the last page of the book. You don't really know whether things are gonna go good or bad at the end of this story. In the novel of First Contact, it would be interesting to see the different human and alien cultures. I know Harry Turtledove has explored this in the World War series and in colonization and in Homeward Bound, and he did it well, but in this one he doesn't. When I want to read an alien story, I want to read it about aliens. And the plot with the CIA trying to kill him, that's interesting, sure. Seeing the culture of secrecy on the American ship, that's also interesting. But then some parts of this book is just him hanging out with his fiancée and his cat, or hanging out with his friend. His interactions with Steve Dole were fun, but with Tim, It's a decent book. It's a plausible sci-fi read. It's just not that entertaining for Harry Turtledove. Sure, it takes place during the Watergate scandal, so it's historical in that sense, and you can see how people viewed Richard Nixon at that time, and Gerald Ford. And Kissinger is mentioned a bunch of times in this novel. But would I recommend you to read 3 Miles Down? Not really. I mean, if you're interested in the concept of the build-up of a First Contact story that's plausible, then you might enjoy this novel. If you want to read about aliens in depth, this is not the book for you. If you want to read alternative history sci-fi by Harry Turtledove, then I would recommend you to read the World War series instead. Not this novel. If you really like Turtledove like me, you should read it anyways. I don't regret reading this book. Parts of it are fun, but there are a lot of better Turtledove books to read than 3 Miles Down. Now, if you want to read a recent Turtledove book that is actually good, then I would recommend you to check out my book review of Alpha and Omega, which is an alternate history take of the end of days actually happening in reality. Anyways, I'm the Avid Reader, and I will see you readers next time.